Okay. Welcome everybody to Office Hours for Introduction to MATLAB, Introduction to Programming with MATLAB, that is, by Vanderbilt University. My name is Brandon Armstrong. I'm an online content developer at MathWorks. My role here at MathWorks is to help instructors like Professor Fitzpatrick and Ledesky who are creating online courses like this one that you're taking. They are the ones who created the course. They came up with all the content, laid it out. We hope that you're enjoying the course. My role here is to help them with MATLAB Online, the grading tool that you've been using, how you've been submitting your functions for grading, and to provide support as MATLAB updates over the years. This course has been running for about 5 years now. You may notice that a lot of the videos were recorded using version 14b. Of course, we're on 19b now as using MATLAB Online to solve the problems. So, my goal here today is to kind of answer some common questions that come up. I see a lot in the forums. Take that as a good sign if you have some of these common questions, because that means you're in really good company and people keep working through the material and passing the course. They've really tried to structure to take you from a beginner all the way to the end. The problems get pretty hard. A lot of people say that the last few problems in the weeks get very difficult. That's totally normal. If you feel that way, keep asking questions in the forums, and hopefully this session today will give you some good tips on how to start approaching problems and debug solutions when you get stuck. And that leads to kind of the other goal. I want to show you how I work on these problems. Sometimes it's helpful to see how one approaches a problem, basically from starting out, running through some errors, interpreting the error messages, and providing some tips along the way. And I hope to show you how to use the debugger. If you look in the discussion forums at many of the questions, I'll say, use the debugger and try to find your error. And people struggle with that. And it's really a skill to debug the code, so I want to try to show that today too. My colleagues, Brian and Amanda, are monitoring the chat, so they'll pass any questions you have on to me while I'm doing it. So feel free to ask a question at any time. Brian may answer some of them or clarify them if he can, and send questions my way. I'm going to try to focus on the first half of the course, but feel free to ask questions about any part of the course that you happen to be in. But I will try to start with questions for the first half. I plan to do another session in about 3 weeks. We'll send out a link for that later. Hopefully we won't need to change it like we did today. So thank you for finding a new link and being here. And that will cover the second part of the course. I'll show some more examples. So with that, what I thought I would do is I created a problem that's similar to several of the problems that you have to do in the first few weeks using MATLAB as a calculator, multiple output from a function, and using some of the built-in functions like min and max. So I thought we would work through the problem in MATLAB Online and then submit into the grading system to see if we can get the correct solution. So with that, let me go ahead and move my picture out of the way, and I'll try to remember to get that out of the way so I'm not blocking anything important. Move video. Amanda maybe can remind me, ping me over here if it's blocking something important. So this is the problem that we're going to work on for this session, and again, feel free to ask questions along the way. It's to write a function named area circle that calculates the area of a circle. The function takes one input representing the radius of different circles. The input be a scalar, a vector, or matrix of numbers greater than or equal to 0. It returns 3 output variables. The first output is an array the same size as the input of the corresponding area for each element of the input array. And the second output is the row where the maximum output occurs. And the third output is the column maximum output. If the maximum occurs in more than one location, max row, max column will be column vectors or location for each maximum entry. So basically we need to do a little bit of math. We just need to calculate the area of a circle, but then we need to dig into that matrix to find where in that matrix the maximum occurs and return that. Now, one of the things that I really recommend is to actually do this in MATLAB online. It's tempting to start right away and just start trying to type the function here, but I don't find MATLAB Grader to be the best place to get started. When you're first starting on the problem, unless it's just you already know what to do, but this would already be kind of wrong and a bad idea to just copy this function definition and get started here. Instead, when I see a new problem and I want to approach it, I want to go into MATLAB Online. You can work a couple different ways. You can work at the command window, which probably many of you are doing. I'm going to close the variable window for now, or in a live script. Now the live script is new in 2016B, and what I like about the live script for building up a solution to a problem is I can type my code, have a list of commands, and my output appear right next to it. It will appear over here on the right, and also change where it will appear maybe below. Instead of the command window, if I type a wrong command, the command window can fill up really quickly with wrong numbers. So I'm going to start here. I'm also going to use this test example that is provided in the problem statement. You've probably noticed that most of the problems give you an example or two to try out. So I'm going to go ahead and take this matrix, and we're going to start with that. Now, in the live editor, you can run the sections, you can look at it here. Our first task is to find the area. I really recommend that you take a moment to look at the input and try to guess the output. Usually, the problems will give you some kind of small sample input, and that you can almost calculate by hand or with a few lines of code in MATLAB. And that will help us know if we implement the equation correctly. Now, this is a simple equation. It's just pi r squared. So we can say the area of the first row, first column should be 0. This should be 4 squared times pi, 3 squared times pi, 2 squared times pi. So we think we know what the answer should be. Let's see if we can do that. So this is a result here, 25. We should notice right away this is not correct. It's really important to look at your input and your output, think about this, because we're not always going to get an error message with MATLAB when we make a mistake. A lot of times things will run and we'll get an output, but if we don't think about what that output should be, we might interpret it as our code is working properly when really it's not doing exactly what we intended. And so let me make this bigger too. Hopefully it's easier to see in case it's small on the screen. So there we go. Hopefully you can see that okay. And so we can see here that 0 definitely did not come to 0. Maybe I don't know what 4 squared pi is, so let me just do that real quick. That should have been 50.2655. So this doesn't look correct. What could be wrong? MATLAB is short for matrix laboratory. And so this is matrix exponentiation, not element-wise. We want to square each element of this matrix. And if you may remember from the MATLAB as a calculator video, that means we need to put a dot in front of that. It's similar for multiplication. Now this is a scalar, so we can multiply a scalar by a matrix, no problem, but we could also use a dot here to make sure that element-wise multiplication is the intent. So now let's fix this and see if we get the right result. Now area here of row 1, column 1 is 0, so it matches the 0 radius that we expect. Also notice now that when we take 16 times pi, it matches here what we would expect for. So part 1 of this problem is now done. And it's time to move on to part 2. So I'm going to create a section break here just so I can kind of keep track of my work. So this is our input. We found the area. Now we need to remind ourselves what is the second part of this problem that we want to solve. So we come back to the problem statement. The second output is the row of the maximum output. The third output is the column of the maximum output. So we need to go find the maximum and where the maximum occurs for this matrix. So looking at it again, I recommend that we take a moment and say, what is the result here? So the maximum is 50.2655. That occurs in row 1, column 2. So this is what we expect for this matrix. So for our max row should be 1, max column should be 2. So we know what our answer should be. Now let's see if we can write code to actually achieve that result. We're asking for the maximum, and if you may recall, the max function can return 2 outputs. It can return the max value and the location of that value. And so let's see what happens when we pass area to this. So what do we see here? We pass area. Max value is 2 numbers, and the location is also 2 numbers. Now, the numbers it returned was 12.5664 and the 50.6255. The maximum function, along with the min, standard deviation, sum, a lot of the statistical functions that are included in MATLAB are going to work down columns. And we can actually just go to the documentation to see this. So we can look at the doc, and it says if our input is a vector, then max returns the maximum of the vector. If the input A is a matrix, then the maximum of A is a row vector containing the maximum value of each column. And that is what we see happening, the maximum value of each column. And then the location, since each column is being treated as a vector, we're seeing the location in that vector of the maximum. So this would be location 1, location 2 for our first vector, and then location 1 for the 50 for the second vector. So we're sort of on the right track here, but we have 2 numbers. We just need the 1. So we want to zero in on this column here. But notice that this 50.2655, this is in the second element of this row vector, second column. It lines up. So what I'm wondering is, if I do max value location again, but this time I do it on the output from the previous. So I want to find the location here. Now I get the 50.2655 location 2. So this looks like the max column should be 2. So maybe I have this wing at this point. So I'll back up a little. Where can I find live editor? I don't have it at my MATLAB online. Sorry if I missed that question for a little bit. Let me back up here. If you're in the Home tab, there should be 2 buttons, Script, New Script, and New Live Script. There's also a new plus sign that you can use for other types of files, like a class or a live function. So I hope that will help you find the live script. Let me know if you see something different in MATLAB Online and you don't see this, but it'll be under the Home tab, so make sure you're under the Home tab. Okay. So now we think this is max column. So I'm going to actually change my variable name here to max column. Now, can we find the row? It would be nice if we could do something similar for the rows. The maximum went down, the max function worked down the columns. Can we make it go across the rows instead of down the columns? Let's go back to the documentation and see if there's a way to do that. And if you haven't gotten to the minimax function yet in this course, this is one of the hints that I provide a lot. This is one of the approaches you can do for minimax, is to change the dimension we work across. So you can see you can call the syntax in many different ways. Let's see what this dimension syntax is. Returns the maximum element along dimension dim. For example, if A is a matrix, then max A, D matrix 2 is a column vector containing the maximum value of each row. This is exactly what we want, the maximum value of each row. So let's try this again. So I'll just keep going with max value, location. We'll kind of reuse our variables here, and we'll do max area empty 2. So let's see, before I run this, what result do we expect? We were looking for the maximum of each row. So row 1 should be our 50, and row 2 should be 28.27. Let's see if that's the result that we get. And it is. Perfect. This is a step in the right direction. I wonder if the same thing we did here will work. Can we just call this twice? And so let me see if this works. This is really one of the advantages I find of MATLAB, is I encourage you to just play and try things out. A lot of times I'm not even sure if something's going to work. I just go ahead and try it and hope that it does. And if it doesn't, then I go back and try to figure it out, and you learn along the way. So let's see what we have. We have 50.2655 and max row equals 1. If we remember what we expected, max row should be 1, max column should be 2. It's exactly what we have. We can also come over here to our variable window. Let me move my picture out of there. And you can see in your workspace, max column is 2, max row is 1, and we think our area is right. At this point, it looks like we might have a working function. So what's the next step? I'm encouraging you to go into MATLAB and either play around here at the command window or the live editor so that you can keep your code and your output all together. How should we go about now building the function? Well, let me go into, I meant to be over here in my Introduction to Programming folder, office hours, before starting up there. So now we're going to start a new function. So again, I'm under the Home tab. I'm clicking on the New, and I'm going to create a new function for this. And now what I'm going to do also is, it's pretty common to get the function definition wrong, either just due to a typo, sorry, I'm kind of typing and trying to think at the same time here. Making typos, if you spell it wrong, that can lead to errors. You can look at what those mistakes look like. And this was an example that was provided for us. Instead, we need to change this to just a single input variable. Notice that MATLAB's actually already telling me that I probably have a mistake here with the red lines. The syntax here is not allowed in the function definition. We should be inputting a variable like R. Okay. So now, what were the steps that we did here? Here was the line where we calculated the area. We had 2 lines where we got the maximum column. So this will hopefully return the maximum column. Notice as I build this, I have a yellow line here, but not yellow lines under here. Every output variable that you have needs to be assigned in your function. And the code analyzer is trying to tell us about that. So when you see something that's underlined in yellow, you can actually go and hover over it, and the code analyzer in MATLAB will tell us the function return value max row might be set. If you have an unset variable and you try to submit it to the grader, it will get an error, and so it won't be able to pass the grader. So we need to make sure all the variables are assigned. And of course, we have code to do that as well. Oh. Okay. And now I'm going to put semicolons to suppress the output. So we save our function. And now we're ready to test it out. So let's see, we remember if R is still in our workspace, so it is. And so let's try seeing what we get. So area, max row, max column equals area, circle, R. And it looks like we have the result that we had in when we were playing around and trying to discover the right way. We have a maximum row of 1, a maximum column of 2, and the area is correct. So now, at this point is when I would go back to the course in Coursera and try to submit through the grader. So let's go ahead and copy this function and test it out. So we can copy and paste it in. Doesn't need to look pretty at this point. We're just trying to see if we get it right. Making your functions look really nice and pretty in documentation. Documenting them is something I do at the very end. Before we submit, it's always a good idea to look at the test cases that have been provided for you, and something similar to what we did in the live script. What is the expected output that you have for that, and check if your function gives that expected output. And so let's run and see if this works. So for radius of 3, we just have an area that's a scalar value. So the maximum row and maximum column are both 1. We have the matrix that we just tested with maximum row of 1, maximum column of 2. Great. So let's submit and see if this function works. Let's see. So we passed 2 of the tests, but 1 of the tests did not pass. Now this is where, when you go to the discussion forums and you get stuck and you have a question, this is where you definitely want to show, either by taking a screenshot or copying and pasting this error message into your question. This will be really helpful for me when I'm answering questions, and for others of your peers who are looking to try to figure out what's going wrong. Most of the error messages are going to give you some hints already. So the variable max row must be of size 2 by 1 is currently of size 1 by 1. Check where the variable is assigned a value. Function failed with the following input. Now, these are usually done, it's kind of ugly, but we can actually copy and paste this back into MATLAB to look at it and see what we would expect. So let's go back to the live script. I'm going to make a new section break, and we'll say failed input. And so let's call this R2. And so here's the matrix that failed. So this is something that I encourage you to do. Again, most of these problems are going to provide you with the input that failed. It may not always be easy to read when you're sitting here in MATLAB Grader. I certainly can't look at this, but bring it to MATLAB, come to the live editor, and look at the output. And so let's see what the error message said. This is the failed input. Max row must be of size 2 by 1. It is currently 1 by 1. This means when our function is returning max row, it should have had 2 rows and 1 column. Instead, it had just 1 row and 1 column. It was a scalar. So it leads us to think there's 2 values that should be the same in this. And actually, let's look here. There's a 5 and a 5. And this R. So the radius, the maximum area is going to occur twice. Well, what does our function return in this case? Let's go ahead and pull up our function, but do it with R2. And we're getting maximum row as 1, the maximum column as 1. Well, this doesn't look right at all. We have a maximum row is 1, so there is, whoop, sorry if it's jumping around there on my mouse. There is a 78.53 here in row 1, and column is 1. There is, again, a maximum in column 1, but these aren't correct. So it looks like our function is not handling the case where there's multiple maximums to be found. It's just finding one. Why is that? Well, let's go back at the documentation again and look and see what happens with the location output. So when we look here, MI, here's the description. Again, let me zoom this in because it's kind of small here. Hopefully that will make it easier to see. Returns the index into the operating dimension that corresponds to the maximum value of A for any of the previous syntaxes. Sounds like it should work. Let's try it and see what happens now in our debugger. So we're getting the wrong thing. So now, the debugger, if you haven't used this before, when you're over in the editor, you can click on any line in your code to set a breakpoint. So let's set one right here at the very first thing that happens and call the function with the input that failed. So we run it. Notice what's changed. Let me move the video picture here out of the way. Whoop. Sorry about that. Get this out of the way. So we're now in the what's called the function workspace. We had a bunch of variables in our workspace before, but now the only variable that's been created so far inside the function workspace is the variable R, which is the input argument that area circle accepts. So we called the function and we stopped before this line of code was executed. So area has not been calculated yet. Up in the editor, you get controls to either just continue, which will run till the next breakpoint is encountered, or the function completes, whichever comes first, or we can step through the code. And this is really what I recommend doing, is looking at your function, stepping through line of code, and see what happens. So let's step and see if area is what we expect. So area was calculated, and let's go ahead and open it up to make sure it looks correct. We can test things out. We didn't get an error message about area, but you can certainly take area and R, and you can start making sure that that they're correct. For example, we can do things at the command line. So the first input, the first row, first column was 1.8. So we could check if we were concerned that area was not being calculated correctly, that area of row 1, column 1 should be 10.1788, and it is. This is where the power of the debugger really starts to come in. You can see what your code did, and you can type commands here at the command window to confirm if your code is working as you intended or if something else is going on. So let's go back and run the next line of code where we get max value and the location. Okay, so I want to see what this looks like. So the max value, we have our two maximums, which is again what we expect. Remember, we find maximum down each column. So 78 and 78 occurs twice, and in column 2, 38 is the maximum. So we see the max. What's location? 3, 4, 1. Again, we can go back up and look. We see that this occurs at 3, 38 occurred at 4, and the location occurred at 1. What happens when we call the next line? Because everything seems to be working as we expect so far. So let's see what max val is. Max value is now just 78, and max column is just 1. So what maximum function does when it returns the location, it's only returning us the first location that value occurred. 78 occurred twice, and the maximum function is returning it only the first one. So since our function needs to return all occurrences where that happen, maybe we can't use the max functions we have here. We might need a different approach. This is how you can use the debugger to try to figure out if your function is misbehaving, if you didn't understand the code correctly. Here we thought maybe the max function would return all the locations. It turns out that's not what it does. It just returns the first location. So at this point we can quit debugging. What do we do at this point? We know our error. We know we can't use the max function here if the maximum area shows up more than once. And this is a question I actually get quite a bit too, is how do you know of the functions? How did you know to use isMember or circshift or some function that I might suggest in the forums? And really, I learn probably a new function in MATLAB every week. There's so many functions, it's impossible to know them all. So it's a very good question. One of the things you can do, in addition to taking the course, is Google something like I have here, find the elements in a matrix map. And here is find indices and values of non-zero elements. So we have a find function. Maybe this is what we need. I'm going to go ahead and I'll update the function, but what I want to point out is when you go to the documentation pages, at the bottom of every documentation page is a C also. This is really valuable. As I was learning MATLAB, and I found the C also to be very valuable because I would often try an approach that was wrong, like I just did. I thought I could use the max function. It wasn't working. Here's the find. Maybe there's other functions. This is how I learn about a lot of functions, is to see what related functions are to the topic I'm looking. I'm looking to find elements. Maybe I'm trying to find strings. Maybe I'm just trying to determine if something is a member. You know, find array elements that meet a condition. There's all sorts of help articles that you can use to learn new functions. So I really recommend whenever you're on a function documentation page, go down to the bottom and see what else shows up under the is also. And it's a very good way to learn new functions. Now, if we scroll back up to the syntax for find, we see that we can return the rows and columns. So what is it that we want to find in the matrix? We want to find all elements where the maximum value of that matrix is equal to an element of the matrix. So let me try to say a little more cleanly going back. So we have R2, which is our 5x3. Let me come back to our script here, to our failed input and close this area right now. So we have a little more space to see. So we can go ahead and play around to try R2, sorry. To basically recreate what we did originally, but try a different approach. So now we have R2, we have area 2, and we need to find row 3, column 1, and row 1, column 3. So let's try. We still need to use the max function. But now notice I have this column here. This is, if you recall from the videos from Michael, we can use all to get just the maximum value of the entire matrix. So this colon basically says find the maximum now of any element in area. And now let's try to use that find function to do max row, max column. And what are we trying to find? We want to find everywhere where area 2 in this case equals max area. So let's test that out and see if that works. And here we go. Maximum row is now 3, lines up with maximum column of 1. And max row of 1 lines up with maximum column of 3. Again, this is something like in the minimax and some of those functions in the first, say, weeks 3, 4, and 5. You might find very useful when you have to go and dig into these matrices and find specific elements. So now that we've done this, let's go ahead and try to update our function, and then I'll move on to the question. I see one there, so sorry that I'm rambling here a little bit longer than what we need to. But now I'm going to copy and paste and try our new function. We can remove the breakpoint. So let's see what we do. We calculate the area, we find the maximum of that area, and then we look to see anywhere where area is equal to that maximum. So now what happens when we go back up and try our test case? Perfect. We get now column vectors with those indices. And so finally, just to finish this off, let's see if we got the actual right result. Hopefully I didn't make any other mistakes. And we got the checks. So there's a few key things when you're working through this. When you get the error message, really look at what input failed. Bring that back into MATLAB Online and test out your function with the failed input. Use the documentation to see, find new functions and the syntax that you need to use, and test your approaches in the debugger. So set a breakpoint and step through each line of code, looking at the results, exploring at the command window why you step through the function. So I see a question here. What is the difference between an if-else statement and a switch statement? That's a really good question that's coming a little bit later. I think that might be week 6 in the course. So if-else and switch. In some cases, you can use those interchangeably. Brian's telling me that he tried, he already answered that in the chat. I'll go ahead and mention it quickly. I think for most of the problems in this course, an if statement will be more appropriate. A switch statement you want to use when you have specific cases. So maybe if there's only like 3 or 4 different items and you have a specific integer, like case 1, case 2, case 3, for example. And if-else, you just need a logical thing. I use if-else when you need a range. Maybe I want to find if a variable is just less than some value. That's not a specific case. It doesn't have to be exactly the integer. It can be a range of something when you're using relational operators. So that might be a distinction. Sometimes you can make a choice and use them interchangeably. For this course, I think an if-else statement is probably going to be most applicable to you. So I don't see any other questions at this point. We will be posting this stream in the resources section. So if you missed anything, if I went too fast, my apologies for that. Hopefully you can go back to the resources section and look at that, see how to use the debugger. But again, when you submit the problems, definitely show the feedback that occurs here in the assessment. and test that out in MATLAB online to try to solve your problem and better understand what's happening, because that's what I'm going to be asking you to do a lot of times in my response is, well, what error message did you get? What is the output of your function? So to get started, test your function with that failed input and see what the output is, and try to understand if you have a mistake in your code or if you just have a misunderstanding in what the problem requirements are. So with that, thank you very much for joining this. I hope seeing this example problem worked out was helpful to you, and that you can use the debugger a little more effectively. And again, please keep asking questions in the forums. I love seeing them, and I'll do my best to go in and try to answer them on a pretty regular basis. So thank you very much for joining Office Hours.